Thank you all so much for coming. I'm super excited to be here, especially since this is the first one. I drove in from northern Michigan, so I came over the Upper Peninsula and got to see some of Wisconsin. It's not the first time I've been here, but I went to school in Cleveland, and so far Wisconsin strikes me as kind of a cleaner, more pleasant version of Ohio. So it's really nice to be here so far. We're going to talk about audio today because it's hard to talk about audio. It's hard for audio professionals to talk about audio. The closest we get to being literate as audio people is in music, and it took us hundreds of years to come up with all these words, and we still end up using a lot of Italian, which makes everybody hungry for pasta. But that's the best we can do. My goal today is to introduce things from both perspectives, from the perspective of the person giving creative direction and the person who's taking that creative direction, and improve the dialogue between the creative director, we're going to call that person, that role. And there's a couple seats up here, guys. If you want to squeeze in, or if you want to stand, that's totally cool. And then the audio professional that needs to take that and take that in. So I want to ask a couple questions so I know kind of who I'm talking to in the room. How many of you are audio professionals or primarily audio centric? Okay, cool. There's not too many of you. This is awesome. Of those same people, how many of you are primarily composers? You? Okay, cool. And the rest of you are game developers generally? This is great because I'm hoping that this will be helpful to you as well. I am going to show examples from this game. It's called Perception. It came out in the spring. The Switch version comes out, I think, Monday or Tuesday, right before Halloween. How many people are familiar with this game? Okay, a couple. So for the rest of you, hopefully this will be a cool introduction to it. Let me start, though, by introducing myself. My name is Jim Bonney. I live in northern Michigan. Like I said, you do the classic shape of Michigan. I'm up here, okay, about 4 hours north of Detroit. I've been living there about 3 years, and I have my own company called Big Loud Sound. I went to college, I went to a conservatory, a very small conservatory called the Cleveland Institute of Music, and I double majored in classical guitar and audio recording. And I realized that audio recording was kind of the smart way to go because unless I wanted to play the Holiday Inn brunch circuit as a classical guitarist, I was probably not going to go very far. But I do still love the guitar, and that's still an interest for me. And we're going to get into that and how that relates to this game as well. But right out of school, I worked for a record company. I was an editor and an assistant engineer and assistant producer. And I found that I wasn't really scratching the itch I had to do things creatively. So through a very circuitous route, I lived in Los Angeles for a while, and I did some ghostwriting for some TV shows like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, King of the Hill, Chicago Hope. Worked on some very small movies that no one's ever heard of and would probably never see, and basically went broke. So I had a layover in Chicago pre-9/11, where a buddy met me out at the airport because I had this long layover, and he was like, "Hey, I'll walk your demo through the door for this game company. They're looking for in-house composer sound designers." And that sounded pretty sweet considering I was, eating my roommate's leftovers in Los Angeles. Ended up getting the job, and it was actually with a digital slot machine company, which may not sound cool, and it's not. But they have big budgets. They have lots of money, and the gestation period of a slot machine is much, much shorter than a game. And you're still working with producers who have deadlines. You're working with programmers that speak a completely different language I still don't understand. You're speaking with artists. You're trying to work with animators, and you're working on a very quick cycle. I think I did like 70 games in 3 years when I was with them. So it was a quick turnover and a lot of experience there working with the other disciplines. And they have lots of money, so I could hire like the best voice talents and the best musicians in Chicago and write all kinds of different kinds of music. So it was a really good way for me to kind of build my craft. Through this crazy opportunity, I got a quantum leap opportunity to go work for Midway Games and be the audio director on Mortal Kombat. Then worked on John Woo's Stranglehold, which probably nobody played because it tanked. And then made another quantum leap to work with the BioShock Infinite team with Irrational, which was amazing. And when they downsized, went out on my own. And so far, the kids still have shoes and the rent's still paid, which is just an amazing blessing to me. So that's how I kind of got to where I am now. I just thought that might be relevant if you guys do have questions. But let's get on to talking about the game. So the main things we're going to talk about is the idea of concepting audio. When you don't know what you want something to sound like, how do you get to what you want? And that dialogue between the creative director and the audio professional. We're going to talk about techniques for being able to talk about it, because like I said, it's very difficult to do. And we're going to use examples from perception. So let me tell you a little bit about perception. It is a first-person, primarily narrative game. I would call it suspense thriller. I wouldn't call it horror because there's not that shocking aspect of it necessarily. There's a few jump scares, but not too much. And you play as a blind woman named Cassie, who has been strangely drawn to this house. She doesn't know why. And the only way she can see is through echolocation. And there are actually people in the world that can do this. They mainly do it by making a clicking sound with their tongue. I would be able to do it better if my mouth wasn't so dry. But they can actually navigate through the world just by using that sound. It's kind of amazing. In our game, you can't see anything unless you make a sound. So anything that makes a sound in the game illuminates the space. Cassie can then see by tapping her cane, or even her footsteps will start to illuminate the space somewhat. The only problem with that is that there's a ghost in the house, and the more noise you make, the more the ghost knows where you are. And while you are trying to solve the mysteries inside this mansion and kind of peel back the layers of this onion of history of why this house is so haunted, this ghost is trying to track you down. And that's how you got a game. So the first thing I think that's always important on any project is to establish what are going to be the most important, your pillars, the things that you use as touchstones as an important thing. And that's important to start the dialogue as well. If both sides of the table understand what the most important things are, that's going to make things a lot easier to keep focused. So for this game, the first thing was the fact that the only way that the person's going to be able to see is by making sound. And so the sounds that they make not only are going to be ubiquitous and constantly following them through the world, but they're also going to be very important to the player. You know, thinking about it from the player's experience. Those are going to be some of the most important sounds in the game. The other one's portraying Cassie's experience, the blind woman. Okay, she can't see, so we're going to try and do all the realism to almost an extreme amount. You know, as if this is the experience of the level of detail a blind person would be experiencing this. The other thing to consider is that she's not a superhero, okay, and she's a normal average person. So establishing reality is kind of part of making this world feel real. And then the last thing is that the house is haunted. Okay, so we're going to want to always be thinking about vibe and where the player experience is in terms of tension and release and things like that. You know, you can't constantly be bombarding them, but at the same time, you want to create this vibe. That's why they came here. So I thought I would start out first by talking about the sound design aspect of the game. And I have an example here. It's a pretty simple one. It's the beginning of the game, first like minute or so, when she goes to knock on the door. So Bill Gardner was the creative director on this. I worked with him on BioShock Infinite. He was the game design director on that game. And this was a very small team that made this game, by the way. It was he and his wife wrote the story. His wife's a writer. And then I was working on sound the whole time because it was such a sound-intensive game. And then we would bring on artists and programmers as needed. But Bill did the lion's share of everything. So now that I've gone to that sidebar, let's bring it back to this. So you go to knock on the door. So Bill sent me a capture of the game, and he was like, you know, do your thing. And this is what happens. This is what I got to work with. Some of the sounds you're going to already be hearing in there were already placed in the game. Where's my mouse?
Hello? I know nobody's there, but I'm just doing my due diligence. Hello? Probably should have worked out a plan if someone is, you know, here.
Okay, pretty simple, right? And so simple that Bill's like, you know, just do your thing, man. Like, what do we have to talk about? What's door knocking and opening a door? So I'm like, okay. So I go off to do this. Now, this is the beginning of the game, okay? she's not inside yet. So I figure, okay, well, we'll wait. We'll save the supernatural for later. Right now, it's just gonna be hyper real. We're just gonna do the details of her opening the door. So this is, whoop. This is what I did for the first pass, so you can hear the iteration. The mouse is not cooperating very well. Sorry, guys. Thank you.
Hello? I know nobody's there, but I'm just doing my due diligence. Hello? Probably should have worked out a plan if someone is, here.
Is this level okay for everybody? Okay, super simple, super straightforward, right? It's not that big of a deal. So I thought, after his what WTF moment, when he gets this, he's like, okay, I don't think you understand. Like, this is her first encounter with the house. The house is haunted. It needs to sound like the house is possessed. You can't, I'm like, oh, okay. So here's my first revision.
Hello? I know nobody's there, but I'm just doing my due diligence. Hello? Probably should have worked out a plan if someone is, here.
Okay, so it's a little bit more vibe, but I'm saving a lot of room, right? There's plenty more to get freaky deaky. Now, I think at this point he's doing one of these, and but now is when the communication actually starts. And he goes, dude, have you seen the movie The Burbs? Has anybody seen The Burbs? Okay, I haven't seen it. But, but I've seen one clip from it because he sent me a YouTube video and he's like, look, check this out. When Tom Hanks walks up to this door, it's just massive freakiness. That's what I want this moment to be. This is your first encounter with this haunted house. Light goes on, and this is my second revision.
Hello? I know nobody's there, but I'm just doing my due diligence. Hello? Probably should have worked out a plan if someone is, here.
So a little more vibe. So my point in showing this rather mundane example is the notion that you can't assume that the other person gets what you are thinking. You know what I mean? If the details are in your mind, the more clearly you can articulate them, the better from the get-go. You know what I mean? Finding common experiences are good, either if they're in real life or they're from other media. You know what I mean? From games you've played, from movies you've watched, TV shows, whatever triggers it. Whatever gets it across. I know one of the things, for example, there's about 20 different surfaces in the game that you can tap on or walk on, and that way we had variety for that experience I was talking about, the player experience. And for Bill, there was a really important experience of walking in snow that he wanted to capture. And the good thing was I'd lived in New England, and so I'd experienced the exact same thing where he was like, when it freezes over the top and there's that crust and your foot goes through it, and I'm like, yeah, man, we know what that's like. And he's like, I'm like, yeah, but it squeaks when it goes in. I'm like, yeah, totally. So, I mean, we still iterated on the snow, but we had that shared experience, and it's the same thing here, where by using the example of the Burbs, we have a better way to talk about stuff. And the other thing was the notion of scale. He assumed that I would immediately get the concept that this should be big, this should be massive, and I didn't get that at first. So again, just being clear and thinking kind of naturally about all the details always helps. All right, let's talk about some voiceover stuff. I was going to show you this example in one of the levels of these dolls. Everyone knows how creepy dolls are. I think these are pretty creepy too. This is actually the same actress that you just heard doing Cassie, with a tiny bit of pitch shifting and formant changing, which is how you make a voice sound bigger or smaller. Tiny amount. She's incredibly talented. But this is an example of these dolls, which we call Poppets.
Have you come to play? Come out, wherever you are. You don't want to hurt me, do you? Where have you gone? The other girls won't let you stay either.
So the reason I'm playing this example is to talk about a couple different things. First of all, if you have any budget at all for your game, spend it on voiceover. If you don't have good voice, that's the most important thing in every situation. And if they can't understand what's being said, you're dead in the water. But the production value will rise with voiceover more than anything else. It's not cheap to hire union talent. It's kind of a pain, but it's just worth its weight in gold. As a sound designer, the more you can work with the final version of what you're going to be doing as your examples for something like this, the better. This is actually from her demos to get the gig. I just use those. That's a perfectly reasonable way to work. I mean, I didn't go into the game that way. We paid her and did a session, but it was something I could use to give examples. Another thing is the common experience we're talking about. I don't know if any of you have run into drawstring dolls when you pull the cord out of the back and it runs back in. My grandma had a whole bunch of those upstairs in her house, and they were freaky as hell. So that became a common touchstone for us to kind of think about this. And then from a sound design standpoint, I think you always need to look for opportunities to deepen the experience. I mean, for example, with that door opening, I mean, every time that door moved, I wanted the animation to have that support. So it gave it mass and it gave it motion. The door latch to make that really articulate, probably even too much, you know what I mean? But that's part of the hyper reality, and it's also part of giving like an extra bit of oomph to the visual. Same thing with this. You can show how these dolls kind of work just by the sound treatment that you give it, by thinking about like, okay, well, how would this work? It's gonna have to start rolling first, and these kinds of things. I just think it's a great opportunity for sound, and it's a great opportunity to help the rest of the team. Another one of the voices that was really important was what we call the presence. The presence was the ghost in the house. And it was one of the first things that we started concepting, and one of the last things that we actually ended up agreeing on. And the reason was we didn't know what we wanted it to be. We started out, Bill had this idea of initially that he wanted it to be multiple voices, and the reason I said Ken was because his example of this was Shodan from System Shock 2. It wasn't really working. It was going to take too much time. I mean, Shodan has those moments that she just pones the whole scene, and this was going to be more in the mix of gameplay, and it was going to move too slow. We had the idea of maybe the presence sounds really sickly. It's like breathing hard and everything else, and it wasn't really translating. There was a while that we were thinking, well, maybe it's kind of this perverse uncle, kind of pederast diddler kind of guy. And we both hated that idea once that started. Once we heard what that sounded like, I was like, no, we're not doing that. And then there was this idea that we do bugs speaking. Like, what would it sound like if bugs were trying to make this sound? And we were getting closer, but we weren't quite there. And then Bill was like, hey, what about this? Everyone remembers the movie Predator, Arnold Schwarzenegger movie. He would imitate the things that the troops were saying, and kind of put it back together again. And that ended up being pretty resonant. For fun, I thought I would show you in like 1 minute kind of how I built the sound of the voice. So let me play that example.
Wish I'd left that one buried in the backyard. Wish I'd left that one buried in the backyard. Wish I'd left that one buried in the backyard.
Wish I'd left that one buried in the backyard.
Wish I'd left that one buried in the backyard. Wish I'd left that one buried in the backyard.
So the second to last version that you heard, that would be 3D on the presence in the world. And the other sounds that you heard, the meta level of layer of music, the sound of the house actually reacting to this thing talking and stuff like this, because the house would creak and groan. I don't know if you guys noticed that, and the moss would fly around. That was actually in 2D, so both those would play at the same time and give you this effect that we thought was pretty freaky. We had to slow it down because it was unintelligible if it was at the speed that Cassie had originally set it. And the whispering part that you heard was actually me. And I would just try and do my performance to exact as she had done, and then push and pull it time-wise to make it match. And then we had a recipe. So anytime the presence was talking, this is how we would do it. As a small side note, I would say one of the things that was really important to me was that it always sounded natural. So even when I was doing the processing, I don't personally like it when natural sounding things or natural appearing things sound synthetic. Mass Effect. But so it's kind of an important thing to me that even when I'm processing it, that it sounds like it actually belongs in nature if it came from nature. And hopefully that came across. All right, I thought I'd talk about music as well. One of the coolest things about working on this project, beside the fact that it was so audio-centric, was that I could pull the levers on everything: sound design, voiceover, and music. And we started with this idea that what if we come up with one theme for this? And kind of like Ocarina of Time, or if you guys are movie buffs, there's a movie called Twisted Nerve, where the theme goes back and forth between being in the world, diegetic, and being a commentary on the world, like in the underscore, non-diegetic. So the writer, Amanda, Bill's wife, wrote this poem, which is like a curse. And I set it to music. And once we found a melody that was, that we liked and was pretty malleable, this is what it came out to sound like. I did this really quick, just so you guys could have an example so you could hear it, and then we'll just kind of trace how we used it. So that's the theme, and this ends up getting manipulated in all sorts of different ways. That's not how I showed it to him in terms of getting approval for what the score was going to sound like. I worked to a scene, which is actually the initial trailer, which the scene pretty much translated to the game very similarly. I'm going to show you the trailer, and the instrumentation. You'll hear this theme in the flute. The flute was like one of the only instruments we used. There was a tiny bit of clarinet, a little bit of cello, and then a whole bunch of heavily processed guitars. But I worked to a video and I worked to gameplay with all the other layers in there, voiceover, sound effects, because it's unfair to the music and it's also unfair to the process of evaluating the music to show it by itself. That's the soundtrack. That's the thing that you put on, in your car stereo or whatever you listen to it on, and that's not how the player's going to experience it. So this is the trailer with the music and the same theme.
I see it in my dreams. Night after night, the same house. A 1,000 sketches, a million hours of research, and finally, I found it. The estate at Echo Bluff. Hello? Listen, I need to do this. I'm at the door. See you soon. Okay, now why am I here? Hello? Probably should have worked out a plan if someone is, here. What was that? The pipes. That's gonna throw me off. Well, I'm pretty good with a wrench.
So that's kind of an idealized play through, but that is how the game is played. Just to give you a sense of it. Excuse me. So he liked this first pass. Woo! Awesome. Don't have to iterate. But a lot of things were established at that point, and those still needed to be clarified as we walked away from he likes this scene. Okay, cool. So the flute, we're gonna keep it very stripped down. Simple instrumentation. And we're gonna try and keep it very lonely sounding all the time, very isolated, not big or orchestral grandeur. This is one person in a haunted house by themselves. Let's make that resonant with the plot. So that's kind of part of the creative boundaries. There's also the financial boundaries. Bill doesn't mind me telling you guys this. The budget for music on this game was $0. So. So it meant we had to get really creative, but it also meant we needed to make choices that were going to lead us towards something where it didn't cost a lot of money. Fortunately, I'm kind of obsessed with this whole electric guitars till they don't sound like electric guitars thing anymore right now. And that really was able to fill out a lot of this. And then the flute was actually samples. And we could get away with it because it was enough in the mix and it wasn't too offensive. And then there was percussion that did happen, but it was all found percussion. So like I would take this giant fan, oversized like industrial fan, and I'd bang on it and bow it and tweak it, and probably should have bought it a drink before I worked with it, but we got all kinds of percussion from that. So that's our creative boundaries and our financial boundaries. Important that we both understand that and we don't lead us down a track like, okay, great, now here's the orchestral score and we need $200,000 to pull it off. That would have been really bad. And then the other thing was this notion of common vocabulary. I'm like, okay, look, I want to use this everywhere. I want to use this theme all over the place. And so that was where we started to find places for it to go. It started making its way into the score, for example, and it would change its kind of colors based on what the level was. There was one level with the Poppets, and there's a lot of little girl type things, and so I tried to use the theme in that level. Now, every game doesn't have to have this kind of heavily singular theme type approach, but because we had it and because it was so much repetition, I could start to break it down and kind of abstract that theme and use it in different ways, in different places. So now I'm starting to play, like you recognize the rhythm of that melody, and I can start to break that apart. And using that rhythm, just hinting at it even, I can really start to play with the notes. So that's all underscore. That's all just manipulate that. But we wanted to bring it into the world as well. So we started looking for opportunities to do that. There's one level where there was a grand piano, and I'm like, dude, what if we like make it so like the piano's just being played, and then if you get close enough, we'll do this jump scare. Sorry, spoiler alert. We'll do this jump scare when you get too close, like it's just gets slammed on, and that's how the piece ends no matter what. It'd be like a dynamic thing. He was like, cool. So we did this untuned piano version, kind of a turn of the century chamber style, and I'm just gonna. Everything you've heard so far is really in tune. This piano hasn't been tuned in over 100 years, so just brace yourself. This may get you in your lower chakras, so. Okay, so that would have kept going, of course. Now that I've put everyone to sleep, there was another need to do something that harkened to the 1940s European World War campaign. There was a character that had gone over to war as an American soldier, and so we were like, okay, well, how do we get the color for that, and do it without having to hire like a jazz big band or something like this? So we took the same theme and we did it in kind of a Django Reinhardt gypsy jazz version, and here's a little snippet of that. Still hearing the theme? Cool. No reviewers pointed this out, by the way, so this is like our little secret that this is what's in the game. And I thought it was clever. Anyway, there was also an opportunity to do something in the 80s, and there was this kind of new agey character, so it was like, okay, what if we do like a new age version of this? And we do it with like electronic drums, like the super DX7 80s sound. So that's what this sounds like. Rainforest birds. So that's manipulating it into a major key, and it was kind of fun. It's playing on a boombox in the game. So the last thing I thought we would talk about is just some general best practices. I may have hit on some of these, I may not have. And if any of you have any suggestions for things I haven't talked about, but you found have worked in your experiences working with audio people, let's talk about that. You know, we'll grab some time for some questions, and I would love to hear your things that you guys are running into as good techniques. The most important thing, I think, always is to be thinking about the player's experience. That's the thing that, like, you can always bring the conversation back to. Like, what is this going to be like for the player? There are times where you need to kind of find someone's personal proclivities, you know, and sometimes the best way to get some traction is to be like, well, what kind of music do you like? You know what I mean? If the person is very into, I don't know, Bruce Springsteen, they might like just really raw sounding music, and so if you start to move in that direction, that can help. And it can, again, you're finding that common vocabulary, those ways that you can communicate the experience through some other media, okay? Common vocabulary is a huge thing. The other thing I often do is I listen for words that people say when they're talking about the sound or talking about the game, and really try and almost use those, because those are common words now that you can share. One of the things I didn't write on here also is try and understand everything, as a sound designer, as a composer, try to understand everything you can about the dramatic intent of the experience and the game and what they want to make and what they want to feel. You know, that's important. And sometimes you have to ask for that because they're not thinking about, They're just assuming that you're going to get that. Look for examples in movies you've watched, in TV shows you've seen. Bill Gardner has kind of an amazing memory of these experiences, and I'm always kind of gobsmacked when he's like, hey, you know this movie that came out 25 years ago that I remember the exact scene that has the sound that I want? I'm like, wow, okay. I must have smoked that in the cell. But he has a really great memory for that. You might start taking notes on things that you run across as game developers. Games game moments you've experienced that you think are really cool, TV shows you've watched. Try and give as clear a picture of what it's going to sound like when it's finished as possible. Setting it up in a video form is faster a lot of times for reviewing and even working on, and then you can extract the sounds. Of course, you need to be thinking about, I'm speaking now to the audio people, you need to be thinking about how you're going to get that into the game. You can't be like, okay, now what am I going to do? But the more complete picture that you can give, the better. And I think it's okay also for a person that's giving direction to ask for that. You know what I mean? And provide a situation like, hey, look, I got this game capture for you. Can you put sound on this? And kind of give me everything, even if it's going to be temp music, but like we got the VO in there, we got everything else. Even if it's sound effects, whatever. When I'm thinking about the experience, whether I'm just the composer or just the sound designer, I'm still trying to think about the composition of the whole soundscape, just like an artist does. Like if you were a painter, you'd be thinking about foreground, midground, and background as your full composition. Background being the countryside in the back that you're not really paying attention to. The midground is the table and the bowl, and the foreground is the fruit that's actually the focus of the experience. In every situation, voiceover is your foreground if there's voiceover present. If it's not, hey, you got other opportunities to let something else speak. But you can never not understand and hear that. This is directed to both sides. It's okay to not like something, and it's important to express that. Sometimes I think the compliment sandwich, you know what that is, where like you say a nice thing and then you say a shitty thing and then you say a nice thing again, it's the compliment sandwich. Like that, the bread of that experience can get in the way. You need to be clear and you need to be articulate about what's wrong, but you need to be clear and articulate. I don't know how many times I've worked with people who are like, oh, this sounds like my dog doing its business in the backyard. And like, okay, great, now I know you don't like it, but I don't know how to fix that. You know what I mean? So we're gonna have to like work with, so how much does it sound like your dog? You know what I mean? Like, should it sound more canine-like, or, and not to, I'm trying to be funny, but like in the real experience, you need to find the common experience, the common vocabulary, begin to establish what it is. The other thing is, and I didn't put this down, words, especially with audio, can be very confusing. If I say up, oh, it means to be up more. Do I mean pitch? It means to be higher? Does it need to be louder? Does it need to be like later in time, or does it need earlier in time? Because up could mean kind of either direction when you think about time. That kind of clarity, going both ways, needs, you need to be articulate. You can't just say up, you know what I mean, and expect someone to know what that means. And this, just don't expect them to read your mind. The most simple, obvious things, they make a difference, you know what I mean? And they get you farther faster. They get you to where you can actually make what you want. And I think that there are cases where you really want, you don't want to inhibit the creative process, but I guess speaking again to the audio people, for me, I listen to the criticism I get, or the direction I get, and then I try and figure out, okay, well, how is that cool? And how can I make it cooler than what they were actually imagining? There is something that they want that is really, really cool. You know what I mean? You gotta dig it out, and you gotta make that experience special and resonant. That was everything I was gonna talk about. If you guys have other techniques or experiences you've had where you found work for you with good communication, that would be great. Also, if you got questions for me, really about anything, I'd be more than happy to answer them. We have about 20 minutes, I think, because I talked fast. I will have to repeat your questions, so if that seems kind of weird, I'm sorry. But
has this game been done in VR yet? Because this seems like the ideal VR experience.
Yeah, we were thinking about it, and no, we have not. It's the classic experience of, you're making the thing that you want to make, and you're trying to figure out how you're going to get it out there because you need more money. And we couldn't, the money wasn't coming in for VR opportunities. It may still happen. Like I said, the Switch is coming out next week. And you're right, we tried it in VR, and it was rad. It was super rad. But it's not yet. I know, what are you gonna do? Yeah.
What programs do you use?
Oh man, okay. So yes, what programs I use. Mainly work in UE4. I've got a new project I may be doing in Unity, so I'll get to learn how to use that. I mainly use Wise as middleware. I have worked with M+DEV. I've released 2 games with stock UE4 audio, so there are no excuses, gang. You can do it. It can be done. There are compromises, but it can be done. This game was actually stock UE4. I'm gonna be learning Sector if I do that Unity game. Then let's see, we move out from there. I use Ableton Live for sequencing. I used to use Digital Performer, but there's some pretty cool things you can do, and some of the algorithms that just come with Ableton Live are really, really cool. I use Vegas a lot to like put things together very, very quickly, especially videos. But even outside of videos, a lot of times you can just stack things up and make them really clean and quick, and you don't need to waste the time. Pro Tools, great tool if you're going to refine something for days on end. But if you just want to make something quick, Pro Tools sucks. You know what I mean? This is not a fast way to work. There's a sidebar. I tend to avoid using templates. I think that as soon as you go like, well, I'll just pull up my orchestral template. I mean, part of your brain is kind of going to sleep. And so, yeah, it might take a little more time to pull up extra level layers and stuff. And if you really are, if it's like, for example, the flute in this, yeah, okay, that was in every single Ableton Live session I pulled up. But otherwise, I really try to avoid templates. Trying to think what other programs. Nothing else is coming to mind. A lot of plugins. With the guitar stuff, I try and do as much of it outside of the box beforehand, using stomp boxes and other analog processing, and not doing it inside. I just find I get better results. And there's also kind of a, well, you're stuck with it kind of approach too. You know, it's nice when you get it in raw and you can futz with it forever, but being stuck with what you got kind of limits your options, and you come up with some good, more creative solutions. Other questions? Yeah.
How do you record your percussion quality?
Quiet room, 2 Neumann KM184s, which are, for the audio folks, this is a small diaphragm condenser microphone. So it's fast and quick and real bright, in a XY. So it was mono compatible, but you still have the stereo field. And that's pretty much it. I would sometimes move it so that I could, like if I wanted to get closer to like the grill versus the shell or something like that. But for the most part, it was probably 2 feet away. I'm working fairly close. Yeah.
I'm just wondering if you have any like tips on how to make. So right now I'm working on a soundtrack for a game that has very loose, like most of the time there's no music or anything. How would you like write music that like just loosely comes in and out while the game goes? Like, do you have any tips for something like that?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so the question was, how do you write music? Basically, you want it to be unobtrusive, right? That's the end goal.
Yeah.
Don't use melody. Melody's off the table. If you're going to do anything motion-wise at all, harmonic changes, or if you are going to have a melody, make it extremely slow, like glacially slow, like slower than your metronome can go slow. You know what I mean? Think texturally, like color. Think less about the notes. The black dots are not important, the colors of them are. And I also find that sounds that can like bloom or develop as they go is really nice. It's one of the reasons I really like using electric guitars. I use a lot of different physical techniques to do it. Like in that example, I was using an EBow. I also have a Gizmotron, which I use sometimes. Trying to think what else. Bow. Sometimes preparing the strings, sometimes swells. But anything that kind of creates an experience that the sound can develop, but you're still not changing anything. You know what I mean? Simple, 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 simple. Does that help?
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah.
As a consumer, like, when was the last time you were blown away by sound design, game, movie, album? Like, what are just some examples that you
Okay.
go to for inspiration?
Yeah, so the question is examples of sound design that I think are cool. I'm gonna reach back a little bit. Breaking Bad was incredible sound design. And also the music choices were really, really cool too. Super cool, both the diegetic in the world stuff and the non-diegetic underscore. It's just so cool. Every single episode I was just like, oh! Games. I can't remember the guy's name who did Limbo.
Inside.
Yeah, Martin, I think is his name. Anyway, and Inside, yeah. They do so much with so little. I really admire that. I haven't seen Blade Runner 2049, but I hear that it's really good. Yeah, I hear it's good, and I hear it has good audio. So there's a lot of crap out there.
What's the worst one you've seen recently?
Oh man, I kind of block them out. You know what I mean? Like just like, oh, okay, that was not good. You know, probably whatever my kids were watching on TV. You know what I mean? Oh man. Other questions? Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess it might venture in the realm of too technical to explain, but so when you put in the sound, does like I noticed that the visuals kind of dissipate when as the reverb kind of dissipates. Does that what informs what in that situation? Like does the visual inform the audio, like in regards to like the reverb zone?
Yeah. Okay, so the question is basically technically how did we do the visual and the audio together?
Yeah.
I'm about to break your heart, bro. Okay. Of course they are triggered together. There's no like threshold that we're like measuring with audio, and therefore this amount of sound comes out. Would have been really cool to do that. We didn't have the team, the tech, or the time. Ooh, look at all those T's. To do that. So it's not directly linked.
Okay.
Yeah. But anything that makes sound in the game somehow has something emanating and is illuminating. Yeah.
I was just curious. You mentioned that that there are a bunch with echolocate.
Yeah.
Did you consider using that in the game, or is it all just like stomping and talking noises? Like that actual like ticking tech too?
Yeah, that would have been okay. So the question was, do we consider doing the real way, the true echolocation? I think it's important to step back like higher altitude on this question, and your question as well. We were more interested in telling a story and making a kind of a cinematic experience than necessarily simulating the experience of being blind. It would have been really cool to be realistic like that. It would have made it a lot harder for a player to navigate in the dark. And we create that pressure of resource starvation, which is your vision, by having the ghost come after you, rather than making it an entirely resource starved thing where you're like, your clicking is the only thing. Plus, it would be, it would get fatiguing from a sound standpoint, just to have that be the only sound, you know what I mean? We wanted to make it more coloristic. So when you hit a cardboard box, it sounds like a cardboard box. You hit the plaster wall, hopefully you think it sounds like plaster. Wooden floor, there were like 6 different kinds of wood that you could strike. I think there were 20 surfaces altogether that we did, just to make the experience more interesting and more cinematic. But it's not a simulation of being blind. There's no question. That said, I did get to watch a legally blind person play this game. They actually play on a really big screen, and they play very close to the screen. And when he started, he was very cynical about it. And after an hour, he was like, "Okay, this is really cool. I'm gonna stop now because this is the end of my streaming. But I'm definitely gonna come back to this game, and I really think it's cool." That's anecdotal. It's one guy, but I tell you what, I was hanging on every word that guy said because it mattered to me. You know what I mean? That a blind person would appreciate this. So it's a bit indulgent for me to tell you that story, but it gives me the feels. Other questions? Yeah.
So I'm guessing you have 3D audio in your game then, if he was able to
Yes.
do that. Okay, so my question,
But, sorry, I'm gonna interrupt you really quick. We cheated in places too.
Okay.
So go ahead and ask your question.
Okay, my question, I'm trying to get into the video game audio industry. I'm currently actually a programmer, but I know a lot about music and sound design, and I'm really confused about job titles.
Yeah.
So you say sound designer, and then I know there's composers.
Yes.
And then you say like
Yeah.
design leads and stuff. Could you go over what your role is, what more like breadth is, and
Yeah.
then how that, like, and then some of the other roles
Sure.
that are involved in the whole like audio process.
Okay, so the question is, what are the different titles and different roles that you can have in audio?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I have had a long circuitous path of learning, so I wear a lot of different hats.
That's okay.
Yeah.
I think most people do it.
So there is composers, they do music, right?
Yep.
There are sound designers, they make sound design. And there's a blur in there, like when we were talking about the music that you were talking about, composer starts to kind of become a sound designer, or the sound designer might make something that's kind of got tonality to it. There are VO, so we talk about voiceover for just a second, there are VO coordinators. Those people hire and coordinate the recording sessions and things like that. There's voiceover producers, they run the recording sessions. There are audio techs, which are people that know enough about the implementation side of things. When we were talking before, we were talking about WISE and FMOD. For anyone who doesn't know, those are middleware programs where they can solve a lot of your problems before you even get to your your game engine. These will be solutions for how you do things like 3D audio and this and that. So an audio tech might know a lot about implementing those sounds into the game or working with the middleware to get the results you want. There's audio programmers who are like from another planet and can basically like create their own, like you should be looking at that because you can live
That's why I'm wondering
anywhere,
what that
do
job is.
anything and ask for any amount of money for the people that like, and when you're looking for audio jobs, the one thing that you will always see posted is audio programmer. And these are the people that can lift the hood, know code, and can make whatever crazy thing that they want to do audio-wise work. That can't be done with middleware.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I would do if I knew how to do code, but every time I try and learn code, my eyes kind of blur over and I fall asleep. It doesn't matter how much of this I have. So.
Have you heard of a audio engine? So like there's game engines and there's audio engine.
Yeah, like WISE and FMOD.
So is that what those audio programmers would be using or developing?
They might be. I mean, that ends up being a tool for stupid people like me, right? That like can't actually write code. So they might do things that augment that middleware or that audio engine, or they might work inside the game engine itself to modify it.
Okay. And from your like experience, do you think they more just work in the game engine, like they work in Unreal or in Unity?
I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, I couldn't tell you that because basically, anytime that you get to the point where you need an audio programmer, like you need them to come up with a solution. Like, okay, well, you're going to need to be able to manipulate. You're going to have to stupid people manipulate this. So I'm going to make it inside of WISE. Your solution inside of WISE. Or okay, this can all happen under the hood. I'll do it in the game engine. So, but at that point, the audio program is going to have to tell the team how to solve the problem. Basically, when anyone's asking for an audio programmer, it's a cry for help. So, I think that's. I mean, there are other directors. There's audio directors, which would be looking at the whole overarching sound. There are music directors that are only looking at the music, and different. And then there's, depending on where you go, like sometimes lead is a more technical role, and director is a more creative role. But that becomes really mushy. You know what I mean? I was an audio lead at Midway, but I was doing a lot, mostly creative stuff, and then working with smarter people than me to do the programming side of things. But then I went to Irrational, was audio director, which was more creative. Anyway, more than you asked, I'm sorry. Other questions?
No, that's good.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
You mentioned that you like handed your friend a demo. Like what type of stuff did you have on your demo and what would you recommend like us to have on our demo?
Yeah. Okay, so the question is, what should we put on demos?
Yep.
That was a different era. So I'll tell you right now that what I did was I put on as much variety as I could. That doesn't translate anymore. First of all, because there are almost no in-house composer jobs. You're a composer?
No.
No. Sound designer?
No, I'm just a game development student that's interested in like audio.
Okay. But like this would be to get audio jobs, right?
Yeah, very much.
Okay. So I would look at what the team was doing that you cannot no longer do the general demo thing. That's just a terrible idea. You know what I mean? You need to look at what that game studio is making and target what their needs are. Be terse, be brief, leave them wanting more. If you can give an example of 1 minute, great. If you can do it in 15 seconds, it's way better. They will whip through your stuff, and I will tell you right now, and this probably goes for any kind of demo you make, me and a buddy once sat down and we figured out, we were like, okay, how long does it take us to figure out whether we will listen to more of this or not. You know, when we kind of decided that this person's got the sauce or they don't. And what we found consistently was about 8 seconds. Okay? So you have 8 seconds to establish what you're doing. Get rid of your big long intros, you ain't gonna get to them, you know what I mean? And then the last thing I would say is, for me when I make demos, I always try and include something of a human element. If you can put voice into it, if you could put people into it, we just generally are interested in people, you know what I mean? Whether it's visual, it's sound, whatever. I think that tends to make a demo better. Just because you gotta catch someone's attention, and there's a lot of people wanting to do it, so I hope that's helpful. Yeah.
Can you recall those 8-second periods? Like what was like an example where you were like, wow, yeah, this is it, like in 8 seconds?
Oh, no, sorry, so you're asking about when I said that a demo I can decide in 8 seconds?
Yeah.
So me and my friend would put on these, we had this stack of demos that we'd gotten from somewhere. This was CDs, so obviously I'm talking about forever ago. And we would put them in, and we would basically just raise our hand when we were like, okay, I've heard enough, or I would think I've heard enough. And then we just, after a while, we're like, okay, well, let's just set a stopwatch and see where that is happening. And it happened in about 8 seconds. We might listen to more, but at about 8 seconds, we were either gonna listen to more or we were like, okay, next, you know, consistently. It was weird. So that's what I mean by it. Yeah. Other questions? Yeah.
Do you prefer to work in a large team or a smaller team when making games?
So I live in northern Michigan. I take the work I can get. I've been very fortunate that I've been able to do some cool stuff. But I will work with whatever they want. I mean, for example, Mafia 3 was a big studio with a big budget. We went down to Nashville, we recorded for a week, then we went out to San Francisco and we mixed it down for a week, and they were just like, yeah, have some money. You know, it was awesome. It was awesome, you know what I mean? Bioshock Infinite was over $1 million on music. That was awesome, you know what I mean? Like, we could do some really cool shit. Perception had literally $0, you know what I mean? Like, figure it out, there's no money there. But this is a really cool project. Why would I want to pass this up? You know what I mean? I mean, this is a cool thing to make, especially for an audio person. So I'll work with, I will figure out a way to make it work. You know what I mean? And that's part of the creativity of it. So preference-wise, I don't have a preference. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Cool, man. Okay, we got 3 minutes. Another question? Yes?
So you mentioned Mafia 3, and by the way, awesome job.
Oh, thank you.
As well. But I'm wondering if you could talk about, so obviously perception is a much more focused area, and with the Mafia 3 and Bioshock, you had much deeper world building. Can you talk a little bit about your creative process in terms of something that's a little bit more focused versus something that's as vast and open world as some of the other games you worked on?
Okay, so the question is, how do you kind of scale the creativity and create a good experience with something that's very simple like this versus something that's so diverse and wide? Okay, well I can tell you right now that when it's as diverse and wide as Bioshock Infinite, you can't do it by yourself. There's just no way. There were a few sound effects, I would say like maybe 15 or 20, like footsteps or knocking sounds or something like this, once we kind of created a recipe that we had somebody else do, but otherwise I could do it all. That said, that's not really addressing your question. I just kind of, just a little sidebar there. That's part of the creative process, right? You have to make this more interesting. So for example, echolocation could have been that ticking sound that I can't do right now because my mouth is so dry. But we wanted to make it something more interesting. Like, so how do we find that diversity? When we were getting near the end, Bill was also like, how can we find other surfaces? I will figure out how to visually represent these. If you just figure out more ways you can represent this sound that the player's gonna be hearing all the time. You have to make that part of your creative goal. But it's the same thing in any situation. I mean, even with like Mafia 3, where it's big and wide and like there's all these different worlds, and yeah, okay, you're giving me all this stuff I can work with, but also how am I gonna make it more interesting? They asked for 50 minutes of music. I ended up giving them, ultimately, well over 3 hours so that they could work with to create, even that singular fight or whatever, a more diverse experience. Always be player facing. Just think about what their experience is gonna be and then figure out a way to make it work. Other questions? We got maybe one more? Are we done?
Just about, so.
Okay, maybe one more question? Yeah, man.
Yeah, so I recently got, about a year back, I hired for in-house audio, and they didn't usually have audio. They did a little bit of outsourcing, but the biggest problem I have is in the communication. I'm trying to get people to tell me what do they like, what do they don't like. Do you have any kind of tips to kind of nudge people in that right direction?
Yeah.
I'll get like, oh, I like it. Is there a certain reason why, or like, could you maybe just soften it? Okay, what needs softening? Volume, kind of things like that. Did you have any kind of techniques to nudge people in the right direction?
Yeah, well, I was hoping that this talk would be a lot of those. And we can talk afterwards some more. The question is, what techniques can we use? Never get frustrated. Always remember that it's hard to talk about audio, and find that common vocabulary, whether that's the things you're looking at what you're actually listening to, right? Or the words, the way you're using the words, things like that. We can talk more afterwards, but yeah, that is the challenge. You know what I mean? How do you understand somebody else's vision when it's in their head and draw that out from them? Guys, thank you so much for being here. This is really fun.